In this edition of Art Rocks, a muralist brings into focus what makes a community special.
I think I'd be regarded as very site-specific in my work, and not only that, community-specific, and that's a very important thing.
Elevating manhole covers to high art.
Well, the great works, I didn't know they were going to happen.
Spirituality finds its expression in stained glass.
You want that spark of discussion, that discovery to happen.
And an architect combines his loves for landscapes and sculpture.
It's always thrilling to me to take something that's really mundane and make it into something that you weren't expecting.
It's all ahead on this edition of Art Rocks.
Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hello, I'm James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine, and this is Art Rocks. Muralist Robert Dafford has made a lasting impression in cities across the country and internationally. Over the last 4 decades, this Lafayette native has amassed a number of major works, and his contribution to Louisiana's art landscape is clever, poignant, and unforgettable.
The 1970s were an exciting time in Lafayette, Louisiana. Cajun culture, language, music, and cuisine were being reclaimed by a young generation after decades where the emphasis was to cast aside traditions and become more homogenized Americans. Artist Robert Dafford grew up in Lafayette, where he was immersed in Cajun culture.
At the time of the Acadian Renaissance, there was a huge emphasis on trying to save what was left of Cajun culture, and I realized I needed to provide the visual background, the visual history. It didn't exist. I went to do research on the Acadian exile and found out there wasn't anything.
Dafford became a dedicated researcher, and not just of the political history. He sought information on the styles of clothing, tools, transportation, and other physical details that contribute authenticity to historic paintings.
I had to do quite a bit of work to figure out how to visualize and paint that visual history. I've spent 30 years and I've done probably 20 large pieces about the Acadian exile.
At that time, Lafayette was also undergoing a downtown revitalization effort.
And then got commissions to do a 12-story tall picture, and it was parts of cars, 50s cars. This building had been a parking garage in the 50s, so we painted 50s cars on it.
In a clever touch, Dafford included reflections of local Cajun and Zydeco musicians in the chrome.
By then I knew that was exactly what I wanted to do. Very big, illusionary pieces, very realistic. So I became a public artist and also, unexpectedly, a historical artist.
Another crusade in the region was to preserve natural environments like the nearby Atchafalaya Basin. Dafford's 100-foot-long mural, titled "Till All That's Left Is a Postcard," was surreal, beautiful, and larger than life.
There's the three-dimensional illusions of plants, animals, insects, birds emerging, escaping from the postcards. No, we want to have a life out here in the world. We don't want to be relegated to nothing's left. And it was a way of saying we need to pay attention to the basin or it's going to be gone. It was in the same spirit of we've got to save our culture, we've got to save our landscape, we've got to save our downtown. We all wanted to find a way to hold on to what we have before it's all swept away with the great American bulldozer.
Dafford's work on historic imagery of the Acadian exile culminated in the mid-90s with a mural for the Acadian Memorial in St. Martinville.
They wanted to paint a mural that would represent each of the original 82 Acadian families that they had identified as being important to Cajun culture. The families got together and selected a person from their family to represent that ancestor in the mural. And over a period of time, developed this painting It's got close to 100 people in it, all of whom are representing an ancestor that came here in the 1700s.
Across the Atlantic, a twin painting depicting the Acadians leaving France was completed in the port city of Nantes. Dafford also tackled other international projects. His series of flying fiddles began in Lafayette for the Festival International de Louisiana. The city of Lafayette then bestowed a gift of art to sister cities with international festivals in France, Belgium, England, and Canada. By now, Dafford had accumulated an impressive portfolio and received 4 commissions in Washington state. He was invited to the renowned Chemainus Festival of Murals on Vancouver Island, where his work caught the attention of other markets. Towns along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, many of them looking to revitalize their downtown areas.
I think I'd be regarded as very site-specific in my work, and not only that, community-specific. And that's a very important thing, that when I meet with the group in the town that wants to do the project, I make them get a historian on board, along with the downtown merchants, the Visitors Bureau, the downtown residents, any other organizations that have a stake in preserving their downtown. We come up with a list of subjects that are important to them. And for me, taking part in that process, I get images from that. I get images, and images come to me from the intuitive process of talking with them about what they want. They're telling me how they need to feel about themselves, you know, and what images are going to present that. So these images then evolve. We go into their archives, we go into their family photo albums, we go into the business record. We find stuff to illustrate those subjects that they choose. That's very different from me in modernists. I have people tell me, Robert, how can you stand to have a farm insurance guy telling you what to paint? And I've always explained, they're not telling me what to paint. I'm asking them, what do they need to see? And that's far more important than you telling them what you need to give them.
Over the course of 40 years, Robert Dafford brought art to the larger public, expressing local histories, legacies, and personalities. And by revisioning their floodwalls as a natural canvas, giving towns a tool for economic development, while bringing beauty and a sense of public pride to each community.
For more, check out the new book, The Public Art of Robert Dafford, published by the University of Louisiana at Lafayette Press. Now, let's take a look at some of the upcoming arts events happening across Louisiana. For more information on these events, visit our website at lpb.org/artrocks. And to find more arts activities, check out countryroadsmag.com. While walking down the street, you may not notice the manholes beneath your feet, but when Central Florida artist Bobbi Mastrangelo transforms them into pieces of art, it's difficult not to appreciate their inherent simplicity and beauty. Here's a look.
You put something down that represents your inner soul, and it's down there in paper, and then up on the wall, other people can enjoy it, and you feel fulfilled that you've done something outside of yourself. Well, the great works, I didn't know they were going to happen. It just evolved. I grew up in an atmosphere of We Love Renoir and the Impressionists and so on, and so when I went back to college to study art, the professor was giving me low marks. I didn't like that. I'm competitive. So I said, what do I need to do? He said, you need a theme or a style or nobody will know who you are. I said, manhole covers. It's like Eureka. That's what I'm going to do. And that was 1979. And once I found out that that was a theme that nobody else was doing, and I entered a show in Manhattan called New Art New York, and people advised me. They said, well, try your new theme. I entered it, and they said, congratulations, you're in it. And I had 6 weeks to hurry up and do this great manhole cover artwork, so I just got started. I only had a few pieces and to show them, and then I had to have a whole wall. And that got started, and it's been going on ever since. I start the manhole cover with an idea of which one I want to do. First I take pictures of it the way it is, especially if it's got litter with it, and I've got that documentation. Then I brush off the litter and secure the corners, and then I have a kneeling pad, and I have a regular rubbing block crayon to take the rubbing. Now I'm getting a little bit older. I see if I can get someone else to do the rubbing for me. With carbon paper, I trace the rubbing onto the foam. And sometimes there are various layers. I have to plan how I'm going to hang it and how I'm going to work it all out. But I carve with those little snap-off knives and use a knife sharpener in between and carve out the various parts of the manhole cover. Then I cover the whole piece with either that plaster bandage wrap that they use for making casts, either that or I use cheesecloth. Then after that's done, it gets painted with cement. Then I take it outside and throw some more sand on, put some glue down, throw some sand, stuff in a little bit of moss, anything. Sometimes I'm out there sweeping up the grit on the streets and bring it back in and dump it in the crevices of my manhole cover. It's fun watching it evolve, and people, like when we were in San Francisco and I did a rubbing of their manhole cover, there was a whole crowd around. They were videotaping it and watching it. It becomes, and anybody who's gone out to do a rubbing has an adventure. They do it for me. They say everybody thinks they're crazy, but they all stand and watch them do it. It's probably whatever I'm working on at the time I love, because that absorbs all my imagination right then. I love the one from North Carolina, the cross cannons and the palm tree, because that has a whole legend to it, and I love the design of it. And sometimes that outside spirit captures your imagination, and that goes into it all. I think it's a great experience.
Next, we're visiting a family at their glass studio in St. Louis. For 5 generations, they have stayed connected to the history of their faith through art, creating stained glass pieces. They work with churches of all denominations with one mission: to awaken spirituality through the medieval art form of stained glass. Let's take a look.
I think a lot of people dismiss sacred art because they see it as restrictive. There are too many boundaries and rules that we have to follow. It's actually quite the opposite. I think a musician, once he understands music theory, it's only then that he's able to really improvise and have fun. It's the same as with stained glass sacred art, is that once you understand your theology, then you can have fun, then you can avoid repeating the same images over and over. You know, stained glass isn't simply angels or saints. It has the whole of God's plenitude at your disposal. I mean, we have an infinite source as our subject, and so you have quite a few options to play with.
My great-grandfather was trained in the Munich School of Fine Arts in Bavaria, Germany, and when he emigrated in the early 1890s to this country, settled in St. Louis eventually, and we've been here ever since. One thing our studio has always been known for is the depth of theology. Everybody who works here has been trained here. They all have their master's or bachelor's degrees in art or theology or architecture. We tend to try to embed many different layers of theology within our windows, some that are immediately obvious when you walk into a church. You see color and form, but we also want people to be able to study these windows and discover things that happen after they've been sitting in the church for a year or 2 or 3.
I am charged with meeting with committees of various churches and generating content for their sacred space. So I work with a committee to nail down what they want in terms of content in their building. My job is to make something beautiful, conceptually rigorous, so that it's not kitschy. It transcends that and becomes something that has a durable presence over the life of the building, even longer than that.
Everyone here does a number of things. My biggest responsibility is to cut the glass. So the artist will set forth a general scheme of colors, and I try and capture the spirit of that, realizing all the while that a color on paint or a color on paper and color on glass are two wildly different things.
The cutting of the glass affects the aesthetic outcome of the window, but even after I've painted on it, it has to be put together. That's hours and hours of work. So for this to be possible, you really have to divide the labor. So we have glazers and cementers and people who install the window. They all affect the outcome of that window.
So we have two real materials that we work with. The first is glass and just different interplay between colors and textures. The second material is actually immaterial, and that's light. The challenge is largely trying to determine what the lighting conditions will be. A north-facing window is different from an east-facing window. The seasonal sun also plays into that part too. And just knowing how each color reacts when it's lit up, next to an adjacent piece of glass.
We do it exactly the same way. It was done in the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. Dad says a 15th century glazer could come to work for us today, and by tomorrow he'd be familiar with everything that we do.
People came to us and said, why don't you design your windows on a computer? There's CAD programs. Well, I've seen CAD programs, and they tend to look more like a cartoon, but the handcraft still has an organic feel, and it surprises people, and it is true. That's one of the things where we adhere to the old ways, is our art, our style, the way the windows look.
After the Middle Ages, society became literate, and at that point our charge changed, and now rather than being a picture book for the theology of stained glass, now our intent is to spark the discussion about our faith, so that as people start to inspect our windows, and we want these windows to be current for an 18-year-old or a 48-year-old or an 88-year-old, and we want it to be current, 100 years from now. So we want that spark of discussion, that discovery to happen, so that the people who do discover the theology within our windows, and usually we embed 2, 3, 4 different layers of theology, some to be discovered right away, some not to be discovered until, years later.
There seems to be quite a bit of demand for mosaics in sacred spaces currently. So we are designing mosaics, and we've done several large projects in recent years. So we use glass, but we also use stone mosaics, and we also handcraft tiles if the design calls for that. So it's, in a way, an opposite medium from our stained glass, because the stained glass is predicated on transmitted light, whereas the mosaic functions on reflected light. So they're opposite mediums, but they're both with glass or ceramics.
How often do you get a chance to work in something so beautiful, it's so permanent, and leave such a footprint in history, and work all over the world? So it seems like each generation has to choose it on their own. For 5 generations now, it looks like it's in really good hands.
To see more, check out their website at emilfrei.com. Now, let's take a moment to celebrate another of Louisiana's treasures. Let's see how art can help people to safety with the Vacuumspot Sculptures.
After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans city officials determined there was no safe place in the city to shelter residents during a major hurricane. A bus shuttle system was designed so evacuees without transportation could be moved to state-designated shelters. The plan provides for 17 neighborhood pickup locations, or Vacuumspots. But making sure the community could easily identify these city-assisted evacuation spots was problematic. Signs alone were not effective.
Public art has been used to increase access to culture in communities for years now, but we thought, what if there's a more practical way to use that? And what if we can create landmarks? What if we can create icons? And so we took this idea and we pitched it to the Arts Council of New Orleans, and they ended up being a tremendous partner in this effort. With their help, we issued a national call to artists, and we received over 90 submissions from all across the United States.
The winning artist was Douglas Kornfeld of Cambridge, Massachusetts, with a stainless steel sculpture called Wave.
My take on it is simply that it's a person. Many of them are positioned right on the street themselves, marking these spots. And so some people look at it and they see a person with an arm in the air hailing a ride. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what this is. We're providing a ride in partnership with the city, a ride, a service, a way to get out, and more importantly, a way to come back home.
In our final segment, we're visiting a landscape architect in Portland, Oregon, who has found a way to transform his love for sculpture and nature into landscapes that range from skate parks to promenades.
Well, I guess my work is somewhere on the spectrum between sculpture and landscape architecture, earthworks. It's not on a pedestal, and they tend not to be objects. They tend to be really knitted into their environment. I started out studying landscape architecture and design. I thought I wanted to be an architect, and then I started focusing on landscape architecture. But just somehow just wanted to make things physically myself. The first commission I got here in Portland was for a skate park in North Portland and Pier Park. So this is Walk Wave. It's a skatable, walkable entrance walk into a skate park. One of the sidewalks turns into a wave, and the other wall turns into a sidewalk, so there's this sort of Mobius strip happening as you walk through it. It's so much about flow and movement, and so the walkway really just, it's all about that. And the kids, they come into the park at the top and they just see this and they just jump on their boards and they just move with it.
It's really cool looking, it's fun, it's kind of got a little surfy feel, and I think it's a good first impression on the park for first comers.
We tend to want to do things that stay the same, and nature's the complete opposite. Nature's, everything in nature is always evolving and changing and growing or eroding. I've done a couple pieces where I've placed stone elements of the sculpture in juxtaposition with newly planted living trees and plants, and the idea is that over time, as those plants and trees grow, they start shifting and moving and heaving and cracking the granite that I've put out there with it. So the whole point of those pieces is for them to change over time, and that's sort of the beauty of them, in a way, that they're not static. The Falls is a work for Oregon City that another artist, Brian Borello, and I collaborated on. It's along this new waterfront overlook and promenade that the city was building, and so we joined the design team and came up with these very iconic 18-foot tall stainless steel pieces that have a fall-like quality to them. Hopefully sort of creates a sense of the waterfall as part of this landscape, both natural and urbanized and complex. This is a public art commission with Seattle Public Utilities, and it is the facade of a giant stormwater tank that's being buried halfway into the hillside. We're going to be placing these bird nests in the wall, so there'll be a space behind there where the birds can nest. These bird nests are going to have this facade of artificial tree bark. Just the quintessential tree bark. Every tree is bark. So this will open up, it'll hinge up, and then there'll be space in the back in the wall for the birds to nest, and you'll be able to open this up and clean it out every year. And we're really trying to sort of turn it into a living wall instead of just being the side of a big tank. Just trying to weave it into the park in a really artful way. It's always thrilling to me to take something that's really mundane, really, that you take for granted, a sidewalk, and make it into something that you weren't expecting.
And that wraps it up for this edition of Art Rocks. Be sure to drop in online at lpb.org/artrocks, where you can catch up on any episodes you've missed and find information on upcoming arts events. Until next time, I'm James Fox Smith, and thanks for watching.